Welcome to Learn to Live Stress-Free. This is Christine Wright with Dr. Robert Wright Jr., your go-to wellness coaches of StressFreeNow.info. Our featured guest today is Alan Eisenberg, our friend and colleague from BullyingRecovery.org, a fellow podcaster, life coach, speaker on the topics of bullying and bullying recovery. Today, Alan will be doing a joint podcast with us about victim blaming. Hi, Alan. Welcome to our show.
Yeah, hi. Well, welcome to my show. I'm so glad that we're going to talk about this and that I'm talking about it with you because we've just gotten to know each other really well. You know, it just struck me, as I'm sure it struck you, how big this Me Too movement has gotten recently. And for me, it opened up an old wound about victim blaming and victim shaming. And it feels like it's like just coming to light. You know, how are you guys seeing this?
Well, Alan, I want to jump in here and just say hello, and this is a great topic that you've selected.
Yeah, thanks. You know, it's just, to me, it's, you know, something I dealt with, and I'm sure you deal with people with stress. You know, it amazes me, like when we were watching recently the trial with the doctor who was working with the gymnasts, how many gymnasts there were and how they don't come forward, how we don't come forward because we feel victimized again or we feel like we did something wrong. And that creates an incredible amount of stress. And I imagine, you know, in my realm of bullying, that, you know, it's reasons why we see so much suicidality with people, but also just a distrust issue.
I think you're absolutely correct, Alan. Part of it goes to a bigger, I think, cultural issues. The way we're raised within our family, many times within a family, sometimes within the household, things aren't right. And we teach the children don't make waves or to put on a good face in public so that when something happens and goes wrong, the child, who is now a grown woman or an adult, still remembers put on a good face for the public. And they already got the message in the home, perhaps, some people, that if you say that something happened to you and you were a victim or victimized, then you're the one that's bringing shame on the family. And that's a completely warped perspective and warped attitude. That in an idea... Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was just reading exactly that parents have to be very cautious now with this, you know, sort of opening of this wound about not saying that to their children, you know, about building that trust. And I know many times children, especially as they get to be teenagers, don't trust to tell their parents stuff. They don't want to tell their parents stuff. And, you know, that's, in their own minds, they start to feel like they should be able to handle it. They're a teenager, they're getting older. But, you know, obviously that's not true. And obviously there's a reaction of, I can't say this. And I've kind of been talking about it for years because I equate the abuse of bullying to, like, rape. And that sounds, when I say that, people kind of go, what? And what I mean is, you know, when you see these rapes, particularly that happen on campuses, you know, the first questions that come out of people's mouths to the victim is, well, were you drinking? Were you at a party? Were you flirting with the guy? What were you wearing? A short skirt? You know, what? And it all comes down to all of these things that have nothing to do with the fact that the person was taken advantage of for whatever reason. And it was the same thing with me. It's like, well, what are you doing, Alan, to attract the bullies to you? What am I doing?
So, Alan, I want to just jump in here because, I mean, you raised a really key point, two key points. When you first started talking, you mentioned the issue of the potential for suicide for many people. I want to just let our audience know that in preparation for this show, I took a look at some of the statistics, and I came across a very helpful website called RAINN, RAINN.com, which stands for Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. and they have
Excuse me, Bob. That's .org, rain.org.
Rain.org. Okay, thank you for that, Christine. And their phone number is 1-800-656-HOPE. And the reason I'm reading that, Alan, is because exactly what you're talking about, let's just say it like it really is. The people that are doing these bad things, they're predators. They are preying on other people. So it doesn't matter if it's bullying, doesn't matter if it's sexual assault, doesn't matter if it's rape or somebody beating the other person up. It's violence, right? And then there are other forms that this takes, like, for example, people making sure that other people can't get a living wage or make it hard for. The only way I can really express it is that there is a segment of our society that enjoys seeing other people suffer. And so, Christina and I have had this conversation about the mob in Rome, how the Colosseum, that there was no sense of, hey, those people being eaten by the lions or the gladiators getting hurt, those are real people. Those people have families or those are children. And so I just want to be plain. That's sick. The reason that I'm talking so plainly is because, as you mentioned, the case with the doctor who, I think it was over 160 girls and women that testified that this guy abused them over a long period, over decades. And these weren't just like anybody. These were top gymnasts, Olympic gymnasts, and they did not come forward. So I just want to just mention a couple of things because you mentioned suicide. On the RAIN site, they mentioned that 33% of people who experience sexual assault or rape, etc., that they seriously contemplate suicide. 94% have PTSD symptoms. So, Alan, the PTSD with the bullying, if the official rate is 94%, that's pretty much everyone, right? And so there are other things that come into play. They've associated drug abuse as well as STDs, and then, of course, the negative effect on the family and also the effect on coworkers when they find out that this stuff is taking place. So audience, I've been a little bit animated, but as we can see, whether it's 1 billion women rising, their time is up, or Me Too, it's actually the same thing, and it's very sad. It's both tragedy and a travesty.
Well, and it's just time. I've been working on this for a long time, and when I saw the Me Too movement, and when I saw, some of the other things going on, some of the really disgusting habits that some of these predators take. And we're talking about a very serious subject, Bob and Christine. I mean, we're talking about people, as you said, we know it's PTSD. In the bullying and abuse world, it's complex PTSD, which is even worse. We know that these people are suffering, will suffer, and will be dealing probably at some point with a counseling to get better. But there's guilt. They're not coming forward because they're made to feel like they're to blame. Something that they did or something that I did, I remember, was my fault. And that's the thing that I just have not seen anyone say, how are we going to change this? How are we going to change it so that when a predator does these things, that the person realizes it's not their fault and that there is a lifeline. And luckily, you've given a number, and that I'll display that definitely for people like this, because the numbers, Bob, were actually larger, 200 and something young ladies that this doctor abused. So it's just crazy, and that none of them were, they were all together at points, but obviously they didn't talk, and obviously that was not something they were going to share.
Certainly, what we're doing here today, I think, is a step in the right direction. Alan, that you said this is really a topic worthy of discussion, victim blaming and victim shaming. And yourself, as a victim of bullying, you understand all too well how damaging that can be. And I think part of the change has to be that the people who victimize the victim need to admit and to realize they're doing it. I think many times they do it with a sense of self-righteousness, that you, quote-unquote, got into trouble, not that a predator assaulted you or attacked you or used their position of power or authority to abuse you, but that you, as you said, you were at fault for being in a certain place, for dressing in a certain way. That's not true. Each person is responsible for their own action, and no matter where you are or what you're wearing or what you're doing, if a woman is walking home on the college campus late at night, the predator in the bush doesn't give him the right to jump out and attack her. Hey, it could be a decent man, the way you and Bob are decent men, and say, I'll escort you home. So just simply that, walk them to the door and leave it at that. And there are some organizations I know in certain neighborhoods. There was a story once in a neighborhood where women were being bothered coming home, and a group of men came together and they said, let's escort these women home safely. So, it's to change that mindset. And with the shame, when something happens to someone, sometimes there's this salacious attitude, and then people in the family end up protecting the predator because they don't want to publicize whatever dysfunction is in their family. And you should be safe in the home and be protected in your home. I mean, the people who are unfortunately victims of incest, they shouldn't be made to feel silent and ashamed. So there's something in us, when we're looking for causality, that it turns to blame. What did you do? What could a child possibly do to invite an assault?
Well, actually, there was a recent movie I watched called I think it was called Vengeance. It's a Nicolas Cage movie I'd never heard of, but it's not really about him. It's about this woman who's walking her child home after a 4th of July party, and she gets accosted and raped, and then through the judicial system, of course, the families of the rapists were completely in denial about what they did, and then through the justice system, of course, their lawyer, who they paid a lot of money to, built a case that did exactly this, that victim blaming, that a person who was already in a bad way was now put in a worse way. And it's sort of the story about, someone coming to her defense, but she's damaged throughout the whole thing, and there's no recovery on her level. And watching it just disturbed me so much because, again, it talks to our judicial system, which isn't about trying to put the right people behind bars. It's the defendant's lawyer is going to come up with whatever scenario he can come up with to convince the jury to let the defendants off, no matter how heinous the crime. And certainly, I think, the victimization and then the victim blaming that follows is about as heinous as we get. There's a reason why rapists aren't very popular in prison with the murderers. They don't even think that's a good idea, and it's disturbing. Again, I think we're talking about a very mature issue, but I think it needs to be opened up. I think this wound, the only way to heal it's going to be to open it up and then close it properly. And I don't know when that's going to happen. Obviously, we still see a lot of it today.
Alan, I just want to jump back in here. I want to thank you again, and I know will be so many people in our listening audience that this topic resonates with them. And I want to invite you and Christine to make this an ongoing conversation, that this will be the first of several shows that we will do. And before we came online, that I had mentioned to Christine that it might be a good idea to do a show where we have several rape experts and suicide experts to talk about the PTSD aspect, specifically on that, the suicide counseling, because again, as what we are about, just as you are about, the healing and recovery aspect too. So there's the prevention side, that we don't want this stuff to happen, and then two, it's happening. Then how can you help the person heal from the trauma so that they can move on with their life. And I just want to add this piece. So part of being able to move on is the first step is move past denial. You know, Oprah Winfrey did a show on this topic, and as I recall, she had on Peggy Lipton, who was the woman who played the woman in the Mod Squad TV show, and I used to watch that when I was a kid. And during that show, you know, Peggy Lipton talked about how she was assaulted by her uncle when she was, I think she was 7 or 8. You know, she was very young, while her brother was asleep in the bedroom. And the threatening things that her uncle said to her, which made her feel worse because she said she beat herself up because in retrospect, she said, well, why didn't I cry out or whatever? Well, she didn't cry out because she was afraid of what the things that he said he would do to her. And as I recall, if I'm recalling this correctly, at that point, Oprah Winfrey, she, said, I'm going to tell it. And she started to tell the story about how she had been raped by an uncle and that she still was inviting him to Thanksgiving dinner. And so I had said to Christine on several occasions, I said, look at this. If Oprah Winfrey, with all the money and resources that she has at her hand, that she could not speak up, this is so that's how tough an issue this is. And so I think this is beautiful that we're seeing people speaking up, because it does take courage, because as Christine said, that there are people in the inner circle who are protecting these predators. And so that is the predators can't keep doing what they're doing if they're not protected. You see what I'm saying? So The thing is so that is one element of changing the situation, where instead of people saying, oh, let's keep quiet to keep the family together. No, the family's already destroyed, because usually what happens is that person doesn't just rape one person. They're usually raping multiple people. And then I just want to add this piece. In Oprah's show, what made her show incredible was that I believe she had on about 200 men who came forward and admitted that they were raped as young boys. And they held up photographs of themselves at that age. Now, Alan and Christine, I just remember just being amazed, because the dialogue after that was, where could a man, if for women, there's shame attached, but for a man to admit that he was raped as a boy, often they can't even talk to their therapist or, admit to their wife or a partner. So we're in deep taboo territory culturally. So this is something that can no longer be wallpapered or swept under the rug.
Audience, we will be back in a moment on Learn to Live Stress-Free.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robert Wright Jr., the Stress Relief Doctor, co-host of the Learn to Live Stress-Free podcast series. I'm an author, speaker, and stress management wellness coach. My published study is the first to show the connection between stress reduction, grief recovery, nitric oxide spiking, and the relaxation response. And my practical application of this knowledge helps you relieve the stresses of everyday life. I have the tools to dissolve your pain points quickly and effectively. Email me to find out how you can start to feel better now at stressfreenow.info/contact. That's stressfreenow.info/contact. Have you been procrastinating about completing an important project or pursuing a treasured dream? Christine Wright specializes in helping her coaching clients to lay out clear, elegant strategies. She shows you how to quickly build your confidence to uncover and eliminate your habitual patterns of resistance and self-sabotage. Christine helps you discover those meaningful insights that will get you to do what works so you can celebrate your successes. Go to stressfreenow.info/contact to let Christine know that you're ready to live your ideal life now. Again, that's stressfreenow.info/contact.
Welcome back to Learn to Live Stress-Free.
So we're talking about victim blaming and victim shaming. Yeah, Bob, the round table idea that you were talking about before is so important because there are a lot of experts, but at the same time, I think those of us who live with some integrity and some normalcy, really struggle to understand. I always say, if you can't figure out why someone would murder someone, that's good, because that means you couldn't do it. It's like, what would cause someone to do something? And it's the same thing here. It's like, what would cause, I look at a young child and there's just no, sexual attraction, and to think that there's these, predators and pedophiles and people who are taking advantage of very young children who will suffer for a very long time. My dealing with bullying in the youth is one part, but to imagine that, you were sexually assaulted before you even knew what sexuality was. My biggest concern, and what I tell people, I'm in the bullying recovery, not the anti-bullying world, because I don't believe that you're going to be able to expel it. And I feel the same way here. There's always going to be somebody out there who's like this, and that will take advantage of a child or even an older person. And it's really about that recovery. It's really about, what we see afterward. And in your world, that, I know that's stress. Stress is a huge part of it, and self-esteem and having this dark secret. The one thing that really I found that was destroying me at one point, and I think destroy a lot of people who have to deal with these secrets that they hold in because they're felt that they're not allowed to let go of them. And it's like you were saying about men particularly, they turn to drugs, they turn to alcohol, they turn to suicidality. We've talked about that. They turn to very destructive behaviors. They wear masks. They're not themselves. And they may even start falling into the same pattern in their own lives because that's a coping mechanism. A person who's bullied doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to bully someone else when they have the opportunity. I always say that. It's for them, it feels like, well, I was wronged and now I'm angry and I don't know how to deal with that anger or that pain, so I take it out on someone else I can. And that's what scares me, is that we're really seeing, and I was reading something about Kevin Spacey recently, and I think his brother came out and said how abusive their home was. It's a legacy that keeps going and going.
That's true, and I think the way we counterbalance it, and maybe this doesn't get as much press, is to say that we have choices. We make choices. We can be sympathetic, empathetic, compassionate, and supportive toward a victim. We're choosing to find fault, to place blame, and for some reason it's easier to highlight the victim because they must have done something to make it happen, which is absolutely not true. The predator, the perpetrator, is very much aware of what they're doing. As we've seen with many of these stories with Me Too and all these other movements, these were people in positions of power or authority who abused that position and used their position of power to prey upon the innocent. One of the stories of the other side, if you will, of hope, Bob brought to my attention. I don't know where else it was, but I had seen it on CNN. Sherry Johnson, who was a victim of rape, and at 11 years old, she was forced to marry the man who raped her. So she's actually working to end child marriage in America. And I would never think, it didn't occur to me that we have child marriage in America.
Yeah.
So it's not just when we look at the rest of the world that women are disrespected or seen as objects. And I think sometimes the problem is, too, when a woman is victimized, her friend, her female friend, who's supposed to be the one who supports her because it's someplace in our psyche, the things maybe that friend doesn't know what to say, or somehow her words undermine that undermines the victim's confidence, and she begins to doubt herself because as a victim, you're already replaying the assault, and you yourself might be looking for why me? What did this happen? What did I do?
Well, and I think,
Christine, could you just bring up something that we've discussed many times? In the Ray Charles movie, you brought to my attention the reaction of the women. Could you just tell that story? And the reason I mention that is because in all too many cases we hear, let's say a girl or a child gets raped in the home, they go to the mother or the aunt or the grandmother and they tell them, and they're not believed. So could you just go over that Ray Charles thing, because
Yes.
I think that this is an important point.
What it was, Alan, I had gone to a screening with a particular group of the Ray Charles movie, the biography, and in the movie he was a philandering husband, but yet the women in the movie, the woman that he was having the affair with, they had nothing to criticize him about. They were criticizing the woman for being a homewrecker. But she wasn't forcing herself upon him. He was voluntarily in this relationship, but yet they put the onus on the woman.
Yeah. And these were women that did it. I think, as I recall, I forget the words that you were saying, that I remember Christine being shocked with the women were attacking other women.
It's
so this
hussy,
is
you hussy you.
Right.
Yes,
right,
they were
right.
calling the woman a hussy, rather than the fact that Ray Charles sleeping with women like Wilt Chamberlain did.
Yeah. Well, and then to me, there's this other thing that I can't say that I thought about it, or didn't have a bias about it. I'm sure you know about it, and you never thought much about it. But the whole idea of a casting couch, the whole idea that there was this thing in Hollywood that we all knew about, which was that there was this casting couch and this idea that you might have to sleep with a producer in order to get a part. That's been going on a really long time. And I knew the term. I've known the term a long time, and I didn't think twice about it until recently. It's like, casting couch, the casting couch in Hollywood. And it's real, I guess that's part of it is, when no one says anything, there's no reality. You just hear about it and you go, okay. But now we know it's real, and now we know not only is it real, but that the person in power, Harvey Weinstein in this case, was actually blackballing people, and I always wondered about this. Why didn't we see, Mira Sorvino in more movies? She had won an Academy Award in one of her early pieces. Why did we not see some of these actresses, Rose McGowan, in more movies? And you come to find out that they were being blackballed by powerful people in Hollywood because they were willing to come out and tell their stories, or they were not willing to do things like casting couch activities that these men were up to. And even some of the stories are so gross to me, so heinous. Like, the men weren't even concerned with what the women thought or felt. They were just doing things in front of them. Sometimes without it being, a shared moment. They were just being gross. And I'm like, like I said, it's just so hard for me to imagine that activity because, again, I'm not the kind of person that could ever think that way. In fact, I go to work today and I'm very careful, with women I work with, not to say, oh, you got a nice haircut. I won't even do that. Oh, did you get your haircut? It looks nice today, right? Yeah. I don't even want to do that because, we're at a workplace. It's not a place to me that this happens. But obviously, I'm starting to feel like I'm in more of a minority of people that really don't accept that behavior, and it probably is that bullying side for me. So, what do you think about the things like casting couch and terms that we've known for a long time?
I think those things are true. They're out there and they're real, and there are a lot of them. We have so many little anecdotal sayings that at one time we thought were innocent, but if you think about it, it's really not so innocent. Yeah. And we say them, we use them, we laugh at them, but in a way it desensitizes us to the truth and the reality of a situation. We have descriptions of how little girls should behave. You're sweet and you're, meek, and little boys, well, they're naturally troublemakers. So we put people in a position and into a peg, whether they fit, whether the peg fits into the round hole or the square shape. We're forcing certain situations and certain behaviors, and we're not admitting to it because, as you said, people have heard this, and people will make comments about certain professions. Oh, everybody knows that behavior goes on there. And I think today, with the immediacy of media sharing and information, we're seeing this come out more. So that's why we can, I think, address it. But I think that's why it's also an assault on our senses, that if you are a decent human being and you have integrity, that you're appalled at the level of atrocities that we commit as human beings. And you would wonder, what kind of civilized society, what are we as a species, what exactly is humanity, if you could assault your children and assault your women? You should be uplifting them and exalting them. So I think somehow we have to put that cry out there, put that out in front of, protect your child, respect your women. You need to be safe in your own home. You can't be afraid in your own home.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't be afraid to go to school. I mean, what you talk about with the bullying and what we see on the news. A child goes to school and someone brings a gun.
Yep.
That, is just a total aberration. That should not be.
Right. And there's no getting over it. There's none of all this magic stuff we used to think, like, oh, they're just going to get older, they'll get over it. We now know, and it's like you said, Christine, it's all there on the web.
As we're winding down on this of the first of many, first of what I hope will be a series of conversations about this and similar topics, I just want to go back to the statistics, because in doing research on this topic for this interview, the statistics are stunning. So, for example, in the United States, every 98 seconds, somebody is sexually assaulted. So that's a stunning statistic. 1 in 33 men have been raped.
Mm-hmm.
So let me say that again. 1 in 33. They're saying 3%. They're saying 1 in 10 rape victims are male, and 3% of all men have been raped. And so that's an eye-opening number. And for women, they're saying the most vulnerable ages are between ages of 12 and 34. And again, as we know, on some of the college campuses, because it's been in the news in the last 5 years of what's going on there. In fact, that they're saying that the certain college-age women are more likely to be raped than just people in that same age bracket that are not in college. So it just depends on the situation. And then I just, my final remark here is, I guess the most hurtful aspect of all the things from my experience that I've seen is the part of rape that's where it's incest. Because as Christine has said, that means you're not safe at home. So how can a kid who's being attacked at home go to school and bring their homework or do well on an exam, or not be a nervous wreck because they don't know what's going to happen to them at home? So I think that getting underneath that issue, especially, and Alan and Christine, this also, it's not just the sexual assault, but also, being bullied in other ways inside the home, where, Christine has actually written an article about this, where the parent or guardian says hurtful things. In fact, the words that are said often cut to the core and last longer in terms of the damage than actually of being hit physically. Because I'm sure people in our audience can remember something that happened to them where someone said something to them damaging at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they're still dealing with that at age 40, 45, 50, or, I've met senior citizens. They said, when I was in kindergarten, this happened to me, and they're still dealing with it.
Yeah. No,
so this is very serious.
Yeah, and I think, you're right. I know we have to get to a wrap up on this part, But I do think it's important that, you're pointing out some very important things that we can continue in the next conversation I'd like to have too, which is what goes on in the home. And the other part that I think people misunderstand is, you watch the news and you see, the things with the priests who are abusing children, or teachers, a lot of people in the teaching industry, and people get upset, like, how can these areas be places where this is happening, schools and churches and even synagogues? And I'm like, you're trying to tell people what you're missing is, if I'm a predator, if I'm a pedophile, what I'm thinking to myself, what kind of job can I get where I can be around children and they would trust me? Just think about that, because that's what I think we're missing, is that they're calculated. They're taking jobs to be around the people they need to be around to abuse them. And we don't think about that.
Right, that's true.
Doing this. Why are priests doing this? Because priests always have the opportunity of trust and to be around children. Why are teachers doing it? I mean, there's logic behind all of it. And as a person who was a scout leader with my kids, I can tell you I had to go through a pretty severe background check. And we had to be two deep, meaning there always had to be two leaders if there was one kid. You couldn't ever be one-on-one. There was a lot of safety rules, and they're there for a reason, because that's another opportunity, right? Anything where you're going to be around kids. So, again, I would caution parents in particular, make sure that there's something like that going on, that your child doesn't have that opportunity, through whatever the poor management is going on, for that to be alone with someone like a predator. And I'm not saying don't trust the whole world. I'm saying you've just got to do things to protect. We have to do things to protect the victims more.
Yes, I think, just to share my final thoughts, that there needs to be a certain standard. We've had a pretty long cultural phenomena of anything goes. And what we're finding out is, no, anything does not go. That there are some things that are morally right and some things that are morally wrong. And we need to clearly define it. Yes, there are a zillion shades of gray, but certain things are clearly yes and clearly no. And we need to speak up about that, and I think we're starting to do that. The other thing is, in terms of victim blaming, we don't cause another person to make their choices and to behave a certain way. Each person is responsible for their own actions. So if we were choosing to be virtuous and to be upright, then we wouldn't be preying on each other. So each person needs to take responsibility for their actions. And in terms of laying blame, you can't just look at the victim. Because someone attacked them, you should be offering them solace, compassion, and you have to ask yourself, why is it so important for you to chastise a person for being a victim? You're adding insult to injury. That we need to take responsibility for our choices and our actions, and how are we going to choose to operate in the world?
Yeah, fully agree, and I think that we still have a long way to go. So, let's continue this conversation. Let's find opportunities, and maybe we can get, like Bob said, a couple of guests who are experts in the field talk even further about this, to go even deeper, because we're right on the cusp. I mean, we're right here, right now, and something's going to change. Finally, I feel it. I feel like this is the opportunity, and we have to take it by both hands, and we have to do something with it.
Yeah, I just want to close by saying this is a multi-headed Hydra issue. As I was listening to the closing remarks by you, Christine, and by Alan, I just was thinking about how do you wrap your head around how big this is? And here's the example of what I mean about how big it is. On the surface, it seems like, of course this stuff is awful going on. But Christine and I saw a Law and Order episode, TV episode, as they were leading the guy away. he was having sex with his own children, he says to the officer, he says, did it ever occur to you that I'm normal and you're not? And I always remember that episode because I have to tell you, Alan, some of the stuff that I've seen back here in New York has been mind-boggling. As you know, we've been in Florida, so between what I've seen in New York and Florida in the last 3 years, here's why I say this, that it gives me pause. I recall just overhearing conversation between young girls, like teenage girls, and here would be like the dialogue. The dialogue was, oh, your boyfriend, he's so wonderful, he brings you flowers, etc. And she says, yeah. She says, but I wish he was bad. And I remember being shocked because she was saying good is boring. So that is part of something that's not really talked about. And I have no idea what the solution might be or even what the direction, but I could tell you that like the video games where people have been desensitized to just awful, the profanity, to just random violence. So there's an aspect where in our society there are people that they like the bad behavior. When you pull them aside and they say, well, yeah, he shouldn't have done that or she shouldn't have done that. And so that's part of the problem, that how do you get up underneath, the person comes to their mother and says, this happens to me, or they go to, as you say, any authority figure. And so part of the issue is that, as Christine has said on numerous occasions, she said when she was teaching, she turned to the children in the elementary school and she says, well, that's not a behavior that we want to emulate. Let's find someone, an adult to emulate. And then she's searching her memory, trying to find an adult to emulate. And that is part of the issue here, too, Alan, that our society has fallen that far. I mean, they don't teach civics. The idea of being courteous and saying please and thank you seems to have gone out the window. And so rudeness, so it's a slippery slope. What I'm saying is that this is a much larger issue because it goes right to the heart of what is a human being and what is the true nature of what we're calling human nature. And so, as you said before, I told you in our first discussion years ago, you said, well, Bob, I don't think that, bullying could be stopped because, and I said, well, Alan, I don't know. Well, I have to tell you, Alan, I agree with you now. Unfortunately, it's unfortunate that the levels of depravity that of what a human being is, unfortunately, from what I can see now, that you are correct. And I'm sorry that that's true.
Yeah, with that in mind, I think we have to look inward a little bit and realize, I think what we've learned in the last year, a little longer, is we did not come as a society as far as we thought we did. We are more divisive, right, I think, now, and we still have the same biases against minorities, and it was under the surface for a while, but it's just bubbled back to the surface. And you know what? I don't think we have come nearly as far. And that's what years ago, that's what I said about bullying. Is, I went to that movie and I watched the same scenarios that I wrote about that happened to me in the 70s play out in 2013. And that was shocking then. And now I'm just going, really, I think we have not come nearly as far as we think we have.
Well, I think that's why, yes, that, Bob is correct. This is a multi-headed hydra, and this is definitely a conversation that the three of us will continue, especially since our work is to alleviate some of these ills and to, give support to people who experience this. So we will definitely be back together again talking about this topic. So, Alan, I'd like you to take this time just to let people know your website and your work, what you're doing.
Well, my website is bullyingrecovery.org. What I do is focus on bullying and abuse recovery. I'm a certified coach with a niche in bullying abuse recovery. So that's something I've studied, and just like Bob says, there's a lot there. There's a lot, for someone to move forward, they need to build that back up. And so that's what I really try to do. I can be found on Facebook and everywhere else, and I've got 2 books out there as well on the subject of bullying. I'm always
Alan, could you just very briefly mention your documentary?
Yeah, and I'm working on a documentary about the long-term effects of bullying, which really is my story, as well as now I'm having met so many other people who dealt with the same thing and doing interviews with them. And again, sometimes you think your story's bad, and then you hear someone else, and it's devastatingly bad, and you can't imagine, I always say everyone has to live with what they have to live with, but it's sometimes shocking. It's been shocking for me while making the documentary to learn about what some of these other people have been living with, and a lot of them are not living very well with it. So hopefully that documentary will be out next year. That's the hope.
Excellent, wonderful. And listeners, you can get in touch with Dr. Bob and me at stressfreenow.info. We are both coaches, speakers. We do individual coaching. We do presentations. So you can check the site for the resources, read our articles, our blogs, and, of course, listen to our podcast and Alan's podcast as well.
Well, great. Well, thanks for discussing this subject. And like I said, I think we're at a beginning, not an end. So I'll look forward to the next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
So, audience, I want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank you wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in right now, because what we've discovered is that our show reaches far and wide, and we're in Australia, we're in Japan, we're in various countries in Africa, and of course we're in Europe and Asia and India. And so, audience, we just want to let you know how much we appreciate your presence, and that we trust that you'll benefit in some way from the information that was delivered in today's show. Of course, as always, we welcome and look forward to receiving your comments about our podcast series. Please let us know if there are any additional topics you'd like to see us cover, or if there's a guest who you enjoyed whom you'd like us to invite back. Please contact us through our website and with your feedback and suggestions. Remember, listeners, if you'd like to experience the same benefits our coaching clients get with us, including learning how you can get more results in your day and easy ways to dissolve your chronic pain, stress, and anxiety, then give us a call at 954-900-2179. Mention that you heard our Stress Free Now podcast show, and you'll receive a free gift from us. Call today to schedule your free consultation. For Christine Wright, this is Dr. Robert Wright, Jr. of StressFreeNow.info. Until next time, be safe and be well.